Welcome. You're here with us at Azucar TV, de lo mío y pa lo mío. And my name is Doctora Natalie Muñoz. And I am here to have a very authentic conversation con mi hermana, Doctora Margarita Lila Rosa. And so I am so excited to have you here with us, sis.
Thank you so much for having me. It's my complete honor to be here.
Absolutely. It's an honor for me as well. And so I want you to kind of just talk to us a little bit about your journey and the kind of research that interests you today.
Thank you again for having me in this space. I am Dr. Margarita Lila Rosa, and I dedicate my practice to finding folks in the archive who represent us in our daily lived realities, but that existed without names, without faces. Sometimes their stories, the ways that they are inscribed into the archive, represents a moment of violence for them or the end for them. But I want to take these moments as instances of victory and instances of survival that we bring into our present daily survival today.
Can you talk to us a little bit about what your experience was like the first time you entered the archives?
Absolutely. So I tell all my students, your first 3 or 4 archival trips are going to be L's. Like, you're going to go in there, you're not going to know what you're looking for, and you're going to walk out like, what did I do that all for? And it's for the learning, because the archive is really an experience. You're going there for the documents to teach you about what happened in the historical past, but that can't happen until you have a relationship with the document. And to create a relationship with a document takes time. It takes several visits. And so my first times in archives, I didn't know what a reference number was. I didn't know how to even cite the paper that I was looking at. I didn't know how to write notes, sometimes without laptops or sometimes with loose leaf paper. However, I had to create a relationship to the archival document that allowed me to read and to listen to and to hear the stories of women like us who were inscribed in the archive, but it took someone like me to actually listen to their voices.
That's beautiful, because it's so often that, especially as women, right, our stories are erased from history, right? Because a lot of times in the writings, they would just say men, and that men was inclusive of both men and women, but also in the same time erasing our stories. So talk to me about some of the stories and the archives that have really shaped you, but also touched you, and connected you to spirit in a deeper way.
Absolutely. And I'm so glad you mentioned this duality of gender in the archive. There's a Dominican historian by the name of Celsa Albert Batista, and she wrote the book Mujer y Esclavitud en Santo Domingo. And in that book, she has a theoretical method for entering into the archive, where she says, when you see the gender-neutral plural, esclavos, cimarrones, rebeldes, you have to read women into that statement, because there's no reality in which women were not in that moment. Similarly, Brazilian scholar Beatriz Nascimento, in her film Ori, she has a line that says, "A mulher sustenta o quilombo." The woman sustains the runaway community. Right? And so whenever we see that gender-neutral plural, we have to read women into the archive. Now, one of the archival pieces that has driven a lot of my reason for being in this field is an archival piece that I found in a newspaper in Rio de Janeiro in the 1880s that said, brevemente será fusilada uma celebre mulata que foi prostituta, and that today she acts like she is a grande professora. So, shortly, a woman will be killed, a woman who's a mulata, who used to be a prostitute, and today considers herself the great professor. So it is an unnamed woman. We only have her first initial, J. But what we do know about her is that her audacity was so strong, her sense of will, her sense of power. If we know that she considered herself a gran profesora, then we know that she was out there in the streets speaking. The archive doesn't tell us that directly, but we know it because we know her, and we know the audacity of women like her. Brevemente será fusilada. We know that she is killed. We know that she is killed because of her public work. And so these archives that were put into the newspapers as police records, as moments of violence, actually become moments of reminding us profesoras, of our own survival.
And our own liberation, right? And I think that was one of the things that called me to your work so much, is learning about the courses that you're offering as an independent scholar, right? And how that allows you to liberate yourself, right? To do the kind of work that is called, right, in your heart, in your spirit. So could you talk about some of the courses that you're offering right now as an independent scholar?
So I was a lecturer at Stanford University, and I got my Ph.D. from Princeton University. And for most of my career, I only taught on Ivy League campuses. I wanted to do something different. I wanted to offer an opportunity for the public to approximate these same archives the same way that I felt them. Because I felt that no matter how much academic language I put to what I read in the archive, I didn't just read the archive, I felt the archive. The women in the archive were sitting next to me telling me their stories as I read their documents. And I wanted to lend that experience to other people. I wanted to allow other people to enter into that world where the woman rebel leader is sitting right next to them, telling them their stories. So I decided to offer these classes to the public. Currently, I'm offering courses such as doing archival research online, which has unlocked for so many people a path into finding out more about their ancestors, finding out more about their lineages. And I'm also teaching a class called Black Rebellion in the Caribbean, which is a 3-part course which you were in, which is based around reading stories of Black femme and indigenous femme survival within the archives. But we don't go about it through dates or facts. We go about it through the original archival documents, which contain what? The stories and the voices and the narratives that pertain to the people who survived.
I think one of the most impactful things about the course is, one, you were the first Dominican profesora that I've ever had, right? As someone who identifies as Dominican, Cuban, Afro-Latina from New York City, but I had to go outside of academia to get a Dominican profesora, right? Mm-hmm. So one was sitting in that class with that kind of representation, and the fact that I had to go outside of academia to get that kind of knowledge, right? And how amazing it was, but also hurtful it was that culturally relevant curriculums are not often available, right? At the university level. But more so, I think the story of Anacaona, right? Really, really touched me. And just knowing that there was like a chief rebel leader, right, on the island of Haiti, right, like holding machetes and like part of the resistance and the rebellion. I was like, damn, like that's my lineage,
yes,
you know?
Exactly. And let's bring it back for the people who are like, who's Anacaona, why Haiti? What are these terms? So let's bring it back, because Ashe to bringing up her legacy. So on the island, which is presently known as Haiti and Dominican Republic, there were 5 cacicascos. Cacicasco as a word is a combination of the Spanish word, or rather of the indigenous word cacique, meaning chiefdom or chief, and ascos, which is the Spanish suffix for a group. So cacicascos is a series of chiefdoms. So this island had 5 cacicascos. Now, the island was called by some of these cacicascos and some of these regions Quisqueya, and some of these regions called it Haiti. So both of these words, Quisqueya and Haiti, are indigenous Arawak Taino words to refer to this island. I like to call the island Haiti because that is the language that was preserved by the folks who liberated the island in 1804. And so Anacaona was the cacica, the female chief of the region of Jaragua, which today is southern Haiti. So Anacaona was the chief of a whole group of people, including leaders like Atue and Enriquillo, who went on to lead rebellions of their own. So what does that tell us? It tells us that Anacaona was building a revolutionary, learning-based, heritage-based cacicasco within her region. But how is she painted historically? Historically, Anacaona is painted as a lover of areitos, a lover of dances and ceremonies. She's known as diplomatic. She's known as peaceful. But in fact, she was a military leader. She had a military strategy for how she was going to fight against Obando's troops. Now, sadly, all of her resources were concretized or concentrated into a hut, into a large bohío. And the forces of Nicolás de Obando surrounded the hut while she was in it. They dragged her out, they shut the doors, and they lit the bohío in flames. And the archive says that they spared her by hanging her instead of burning her because of her high position. So this constitutes the fall of the Jaragua Cacicasco, which happened in 1503, 1504. What happens after that? Atue, who's a un cacique menor, under Anacaona, so Anacaona was his cacica, he takes 200 people, over 200 people, to the island of Cuba. And they are trying to warn the Taino people there about the coming of the Spanish. There, the Spanish capture him eventually. Before they capture him, he does a series of lectures about how the Spanish venerate gold and about how they are so obsessed with this thing that is a sign of honor and royalty, but not really a currency for exchange. So he gives all of these prolific public lectures, but he also does something else at the moment of his death. When he is tied to a tree and they're about to burn him, they ask him, "You have one more opportunity to go to heaven. Do you want to go to heaven or do you want to go to hell?" And he says, "Are there Spanish people in heaven?" And they say yes. And he says, and it says in the archive, without hesitating, he says, "Then send me directly to hell. Because I don't want to be where there are such evil people." Wow. Now that story of survival is the kind of story that I want to dig from the archive and remind us, because these stories have been passed down. That Anacaona was the cacica of Atue, but also of Enriquillo, who was 4 years old when she was killed. But he was her nephew, and then went on to lead one of the strongest maroon runaway communities of Black and Indigenous people on the island. Is incredible. So these are the kinds
so
of
powerful.
stories. That's right.
I remember sitting in the class and like it was like majority Afro-Latinas, Caribbean women, and almost 50, like, it was like 50 of us, and almost everyone was in tears, right? Yeah. And I realized then that, like, archival research is healing. It's part of our healing because of the disconnect that we have from our culture, from our history, sometimes even from our language, right? Absolutely. And so I was curious, do you see yourself as a healer in the work that you do, or how do you imagine the work that you're doing right now?
Thank you so much for that question and provocation and even, suggestion. I would consider myself a vessel. I am a vessel for the ancestors to come tell us their stories. I'm a vessel for us to feel self-worth and self-confidence. I'm a vessel for us to connect to spirits. And when those things bring about healing for others, it brings healing for everybody.
Absolutely. So you mentioned being a vessel, right? And I also know that you're a curator. So can you talk to us about how you use art as healing as well, and some artists that are currently like moving you, but also inspiring you today that are from the diaspora?
Something that draws me to art is its ability to expand on the archival narratives. It gives us fabulous and fantastical ways to interpret the archive and therein interpret our own relationship to the archive. I'm incredibly drawn to the works of Elia Elba. She is a monumental installation artist who has created beautiful works like Portrait of a Young Girl and her Bust series, which talk about bodily affirmation, bodily dysmorphia, thinking of racial identity within the body and how we present ourselves and how we are perceived. Her work is incredibly powerful. I also think about the work of Bonnie Ramirez, who reinterprets archival moments by giving victory, by giving royalty to Black and indigenous people. And so this is the kind of artistry that moves me. I'm also incredibly moved by feminist abstraction, by the gestural, by things that are thought to be not political or not historical, but are. Right? So this is the kind of art that really moves me.
I love that. Thank you for sharing. That is pretty much it for our episode. But I just want to make sure that, our followers are able to stay connected with you. So if you could just let them know, like, what's the best way to connect with you?
Absolutely. So you can find me on Instagram at Margarita Lila Rosa. And there you'll be able to find a breadth of videos about language, about historical research, about ways that we can be connected to other cultures around the world and connected to each other. And I just want to thank you, Natalie.
Oh my God, thank you. And if y'all have not taken a class with Margarita, please, this doctora is fire. So you need to check out her classes and connect with her on Instagram. Thank you again so much, sis.
Thank you so much for having me.
I'm so happy that you were able to share with us. And I appreciate all the work that you're doing within the diaspora.